Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Florida Springs Council's live discussion on urban fertilizer. My name is Chloe Doherty, and before we begin, I just wanted to say, if you're joining us live, thank you. You are encouraged to leave questions and comments in the chat or the comment section on whatever platform you are joining us on. We are live on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. At the end of the presentations, we will have time at the end where we will be answering some of the questions and comments that we see pop up in the chat. Just one note, it is easier for us to monitor comments and questions we see from Facebook and YouTube. So if you're joining us from Instagram, just be wary of that. We're checking it, but hop over to Facebook or YouTube if you don't see your question pop up. And if you want to share this afterward, we would really appreciate it. This is being saved as a recording following the live discussion on both Facebook and YouTube. Ryan, you ready to start?
Yeah, thanks, Chloe. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Before we get going with our live discussion on urban fertilizer communications, we wanted to take a little bit of time at the beginning of each one of these monthly webinars to talk a little bit about some of the things FSC is doing and some of the major developments going on in the springs and water world. As most of you know, legislative session ended more than 2 months ago, but a lot of the bills and the budget, importantly, have still been not sent to the governor, which means the bills could be vetoed or line item appropriations could be vetoed out of the budget. FSC and many of our partner groups are calling on Governor DeSantis to veto House Bill 87 and 3 single appropriations in the 24-25 fiscal year budget that could potentially harm Florida's springs and waters.
Yeah, so like Ryan said, we have several different actions you can take today to use your voice for the springs. If you want to take action, you can head to floridaspringscouncil.org/legislative session or go to our website, floridaspringscouncil.org, and there's a tab at the top for action alerts, or you can find them at the link in our social media bios. Like Ryan said, the first action you can take is sending an email to the governor asking him to veto HB 87, taking of bears. This email is asking the governor to veto this bill because it would allow anyone to shoot a bear if they feel they or their property are being threatened. It's a dangerous bill, and we are asking the governor to protect Florida black bears, veto this bill, and support fair education programs and increase funding for trash removal in various counties across the state instead. This bill would go further than any of the legislation that already exists where people can defend themselves against any imminent wildlife threats. So it is a dangerous bill, and we're asking for you to contact the governor. Any of our action alerts, the emails are already pre-written, so you just have to go in, fill out your information, and it is just a click away to take action. Our second action alert is vetoing 2 harmful studies that were included in the budget. The first is $25 million for the FGCU Water School to conduct a comprehensive water quality study. This is a new study conducted by an unknown contractor to determine the already known sources of pollution. These are sources of pollution that are clear in DEP's basin management action plans. So this is just an unnecessary study, a waste of taxpayer dollars, and it would delay important rules and programs to actually clean up these sources of pollution. The third budget item that we are asking the governor to veto is included in that second action alert, and this is $4 million to UF IFAS for the fertilizer rate study. This study does not take into account water quality. So if DAX adopts the recommendations from this study as part of updated agricultural best management practices, it will result in a massive increase in pollution entering Florida's waters. So we're asking the governor to veto this study because, again, it's an unnecessary use of taxpayer dollars and it will result in more pollution entering Florida's waters. Ryan, do you have anything to add to those items?
No, good job, Chloe. There is one more budget item that we're asking the governor to veto. This is a separate alert and letter that you'll find on our website, and that is the $400 million for the Groveland Reservoir. This is a project that never appeared in committee, was never vetted. It was added to the budget kind of in the last weeks of session. And essentially what it would do is take polluted water from South Florida and redirect that water into the St. Johns River with the purported goal of fueling new development in that basin. This is it's just a terrible use of taxpayer money. $400 million, I think, is probably more than the Springs have received in the last 8 years combined. And second, this project really should be paid for by developers if it's going to happen at all. But we have to get away from the trend of sending South Florida's pollution into North Florida. About 10 years ago, the state made a rule that we could no longer spread biosolids in South Florida, and all of those biosolids are now being spread in Central and North Florida, largely in the St. Johns River Basin. This would just add to that pollution, especially phosphorus. And it's terrible public policy. So we encourage everyone to go to floridaspringscouncil.org. You could become an FSC member, use any of our tools. All of it is free to anyone in the public. So please take advantage of that. We generated over 10,000 emails and have really seen that be effective in helping to stop some very damaging legislation. The other thing that's going on right now are the outstanding Florida Springs Basin Management Action Plans. As a lot of you are probably aware, back in 2018, a group of Florida Springs Council member groups and individuals challenged the Basin Management Action Plans for 5 Basin Management Action Plans for 13 outstanding Florida Springs, saying that those plans did not meet the minimum requirements of law. In February of 2023, the First District Court of Appeals ruled in our favor and ordered DEP to create new BMAPs that meet the requirements of statute. Unfortunately, the court also granted DEP's request to delay the adoption of those new BMAPs until July of 2025. So FSC is focusing on enforcing our legal victory throughout this rulemaking process, and we're encouraging our members to engage. And on that note, we have quite a few public meetings on outstanding Florida Springs BMAPs coming up in the next 2 weeks. Chloe, would you tell us about those?
Yes. So these are all virtual public meetings. All the information is available on DEP's website, which Brenda just dropped the link to that in the comment sections. So you are encouraged to register for these meetings to start getting engaged in this process. The next meetings are happening on May 24th. The first is at 10 a.m. for the Swanee River BMAP, then 1:30 p.m. for the Santa Fe River BMAP. Then the following week on May 29th, they are having both the meeting for De Leon Spring, Gemini Spring, and Volusia Blue Spring happening at May 29th at 10 a.m. Then following that one, May 29th at 1:30 p.m. is the Wekiwa and Rock Springs BMAP. Then on May 30th at 10 a.m., lots of springs covered here, Crystal River, Kings Bay, Homosassa, Chassahowitzka, and Weeki Wachee BMAP. And finally, on May 30th at 1:30 p.m. is the Silver and Rainbow Springs BMAP. And like I said, all this information and the links to register are on DEP's website, which is at the link in our bio on our social media channels, or Brenda just put it in the comments section. Like Ryan said, we are encouraging our members, Springs advocates, to get involved in this process. We anticipate that they are holding multiple meetings for each BMAP, so this is not the last time you'll be hearing about this, but it's great to start getting involved early on so we can hold DEP accountable and ensure that the state adopts meaningful and effective basin management action plans.
Absolutely. And in these meetings, they're really focusing on the nitrogen source inventory loading tool, which tells us kind of where the pollution is coming from for each spring, and the spring vent analysis. And if you tune in next month to our webinar series, we'll be doing a review of how those things have changed from the initial B maps drafted in 2018 to where we are now and here and in 2024. Have things gotten better or worse, and have we seen the sources of pollution change? All right, thank you very much, Chloe. And now we're going to get into our main topic, urban fertilizer. Urban fertilizer is the third largest source of pollution at outstanding Florida springs after agriculture and septic tanks, and is a major source of pollution in many of our suburban and urban area springs. This is a very important time of year for urban fertilizer. Many of our urban fertilizer blackout periods are about to go into effect, and the state's 1-year moratorium on new protective fertilizer ordinances is about to expire, giving local governments an opportunity to add more protective ordinances that include blackout periods. We found over and over that reducing urban fertilizer is the most cost-effective way we have to restore Florida's waters. But it really relies on education to change behaviors when it comes to how we deal with urban fertilizer. So, we're kind of coming into this assuming all of you know that urban fertilizer is bad for our waters, that you shouldn't be applying this to your yards, especially during the rainy seasons, that you're aware of if your local government does or does not have an ordinance and follow it. So we wanted to highlight some of the great urban fertilizer education communication campaigns being done by local governments and nonprofits across Florida. And our first presenter to that end today is Blake Simmons with the Tampa Bay Estuary program. Blake is an environmental social scientist who focuses on the human dimensions of conservation across Tampa Bay and creating pro-environmental behavior change that benefits nature and society. And he's going to be talking about one of the first big urban fertilizer campaigns, the Be Floridian campaign, which is currently being updated. So Blake, thank you very much for being here, and take it away.
Thanks, Ryan. Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks for joining us today, and thanks to the FSC for inviting me to chat a bit about one of our oldest campaigns that we have here, geared towards reducing fertilizer runoff into Tampa Bay waterways, called Be Floridian. So let's get started. So just what is Be Floridian? Some of you may have heard of it or seen some of the pink flamingos around, but Be Floridian is the Tampa Bay Estuary program's flagship social marketing campaign for reducing fertilizer use throughout our watershed. It's an identity campaign that frames two target behaviors: avoiding fertilizer during the summer and adopting native and Florida-friendly plants, as the norm for locals who want to protect their waterways and protect those fun activities that make, Tampa Bay a desirable place to live. And it's unique among many environmental education programs in the region for its longevity, strong partnerships, and consistent financial support. It's lighthearted and, quote unquote, non-governmental treatment of this issue, and especially for our little Felix the Flamingo mascot. And over the last decade, Be Floridian has been fully embraced by the city of Tampa, Pinellas County, Manatee County, Sarasota counties. All of them have been active partners in the effort to promote gardening like a Floridian. So next slide. As I mentioned, this is one of the oldest social marketing campaigns in the region, with the goal of reducing voluntary fertilizer use and increasing compliance with local fertilizer laws in the Tampa Bay area. We started developing this campaign all the way back in 2009, just as new fertilizer ordinances were being implemented in our area. And as soon as we started doing some initial background research into the issue and the perceptions of residents in the Bay Area, we uncovered some key insights. First, we found that most residents don't know that fertilizing during the summer can be harmful to the Bay. And this is most prevalent in new Florida residents that came from out of state. In fact, at that time, the majority of new residents we found were coming from New Jersey and Ohio, which have a very different climate than Southwest Florida and very different types of habitats. And this is important because most residents prefer the look of those more traditional grassy lawns that are more characteristic of Midwestern and Northeastern landscapes. And yards with a more natural Floridian look were often seen as unattractive, unkempt, or too wild looking for many residents. Even though it's much more expensive to maintain an unnatural grassy lawn in Florida, and the high demand of water and fertilizer for these grasses means more nitrogen will get washed away into our stormwater drains. And although many people need to do regular yard work to be able to maintain those grassy lawns, a lot of them admitted that, it's hard work and it's not particularly enjoyable. Though, of course, some folks do enjoy it and find it quite therapeutic. But when we started testing some different potential campaign messages with residents, we found that people generally preferred emphasizing the opportunities to replace yard work with fun summer activities. Although many people did like messages that showed the damage that can be done to waterways from excess fertilizer, ultimately they felt kind of turned off by those messages because it was viewed as gross or depressing, or felt like we were guilt tripping them. So long story short, all this background information and feedback from the community was used to officially launch the Be Floridian campaign back in 2011, and we ran an intensive marketing push over the next 4 years. And in the next slide, you'll see what it looks like. So here's the Be Floridian campaign. There's really 2 core components to it. First, the name Be Floridian was specifically chosen to connect with new residents' desire to acclimate to life here in Florida. You're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy. This isn't New Jersey or Ohio. Florida is a very different environment. And what works in Ohio, or what's easy to maintain in Ohio, or what's good for the environment in Ohio, isn't what's good for Florida. So this core component is really meant to solidify this social norm that Floridians don't fertilize their lawns in the summer, and they don't have the same type of yards as the rest of the country. And the second component, which you can probably see sort of everywhere on here, is the emphasis on choosing fun instead of fertilizing. So if you don't want to stop fertilizing in the summer for the environment, do it for yourself. Skip the fertilizer and go enjoy all the fun activities that a healthy bay can offer you, like going fishing, boating, or just relaxing on the beach. And in the next slide, you'll see that sort of, once we hook people in with those marketing materials, we provide them with several resources about what it means to fertilize like a Floridian. And here's an example of information on how to follow the Hillsborough County Fertilizer Ordinance. It gives recommendations for what to do during the months outside the ordinance. You can still use fertilizer, but twice as nice. April and October here are good times to apply fertilizer to your yard or garden. Always try to avoid fertilizing before it rains, regardless of the time of year, and always use slow-release nitrogen fertilizers. But during the summer, if you really do want to do yard work, instead of using fertilizer, you can use products containing iron that'll help green up your lawn. You can give your yard a boost by adding compost or manure to your soil. Or you can go shopping for Florida-friendly plants that already know how to flourish on their own in the Florida climate. We also provide suggestions for quick ways you can floridify your yard, whether you've just got a morning or an entire weekend that you can devote to designing a more Florida-friendly yard. And in the next slide shows our Be Floridian website, which hosts all of these materials and is a great portal for all of our Florida-friendly yard work needs. Our Yard 911 contains answers to many frequently asked questions about fertilizer and maintaining a healthy and productive Florida yard. You can also access a homeowner toolkit that gives you a rundown of tips and tricks, including how to get the green thumbs up from your HOA or neighborhood association. You can browse Florida-friendly products like organic fertilizers, vegetable fertilizers, and compost products. And you can also view the fertilizer laws in your area so you know what rules apply to you or what don't apply to you during different parts of the year. And next slide, our Be Floridian campaign, we also had a lot of fun promotional events to them that made them really successful. So our Follow the Flock events saw our Felix the Flamingo take over urban areas of Tampa Bay, and we had photo contests for residents to share, how they replace fertilizer with fun in the summer. And one of my favorite events was called The Art of Being Floridian, which was an activity where we had 25 artists from throughout the Tampa Bay area actually designed and got to name their own little Felix the Flamingo. We also did a lot of community outreach. So next slide. We had ads that were placed on buses, city vehicles, and even dumpsters to remind people to skip the fertilizer and choose fun this summer. Because this campaign at the time was early in the adoption of several counties' fertilizer ordinances, we also went to places like Lowe's and Ace Hardware, where fertilizer is sold, to tell folks about the ordinance and highlight the Florida-friendly fertilizer products that they could purchase at the store while they're there. So in this next slide, my final slide, what does the future hold for Be Floridian after all of this time? Well, after our campaign, we learned some important information about residents. Nearly half of all residents in Pinellas, Hillsborough, and Manatee counties say that they never use fertilizer, but of those who do, more than half of them rely on a professional lawn care provider or company to do it for them. Nearly everyone surveyed had heard that too much fertilizer can pollute nearby waterways, which is great. But there's a lot of variation between the counties in terms of how many people had heard that you shouldn't fertilize in the summer. And even though almost half have heard about the harm that fertilizer can do, just under half of the residents had actually heard of Be Floridian before the survey. So after nearly 15 years, we're now gearing up to revamp Be Floridian for a new generation of residents and homeowners in Tampa Bay. There's still several unknowns that we need to investigate in order to be able to improve Be Floridian and create substantial behavior change. Most importantly, now that there is some campaign recognition in the public and more people are aware of fertilizer ordinances, we need to know how much the Be Floridian campaign actually contributes to fertilizer knowledge and behaviors compared to other messages being relayed by city and county governments. We also need to know if there have been any noticeable changes in residents' preferences for grassy lawns, and if residents are actually reducing their fertilizer use in the summer or replacing their lawns with Florida-friendly landscapes. Also, it's been 15 years since we last did background research on Tampa Bay residents. Tampa Bay's population has changed dramatically during this time, so we have several questions about how relevant our previous campaign messages may or may not be for today's current population in the region. And finally, so much focus has previously been on individual residents, but the rise in HOA communities and retirement communities, we may need to shift or at least create additional campaign messages specifically targeting HOAs and landscape companies to make sure that they understand the importance of Florida-friendly landscaping practices and that they'll allow residents to modify their yards the way they want to so that they can protect fun and protect our waterways. So keep a lookout for the next generation of Be Floridian. Thank you all very much for your attention. Feel free to check out befloridian.org to learn more about fertilizer ordinances in Tampa Bay and how you can protect fun this summer. And always feel free to contact me if you ever have any questions or would like more information. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Blake. That was great. And I know a lot of us have turned Be Floridian over the last 15 years for examples of how to do this education well. And we're looking forward to seeing the update. We'll have you back on at the end for Q&A. Our next presenter is Jane Gregory, the Environmental Programs Administrator for the Orange County Environmental Protection Division. In 2022, Orange County strengthened their fertilizer ordinance, which now includes a blackout period from June 1st to September 30th. And Jane's going to share with us some of the ways Orange County has been educating residents about the updated ordinance. Thank you very much, Jane.
Hi. Thank you for having me on. This is really exciting. There is so much that I could talk about with fertilizer, but we're just talking about our education campaign today. And on the next slide, I've got a real quick history of our ordinance. So like Tampa Bay, we started ours in 2009. So we're coming up on, 15 years of having an ordinance. We were not able to get any kind of sales restriction in because it wasn't, our county commission wasn't up for that at the time. So we missed that opportunity. But I've got more information about that. In 2017, we updated our ordinance. And at that time, there was some pushback from different entities saying that maybe the nutrient pollution was more coming from septic tanks than it was from fertilizer. So our county commission directed us to do a study. So we called that our nitrate isotope study. And in 2022, we brought back the nitrate study findings and were able to show that fertilizer really was having a detrimental impact on our water bodies, and significantly so. And we were able to update our ordinance and pass that legislation in 2022. The next slide shows us who we regulate, which is pretty much everyone, right? The people who live in our county. Retailers, only a very small amount. I'll touch on that in a minute. But anyone who's applying fertilizer, like from a commercial, an institutional, or a residential standpoint, any municipalities, unless they have a more stringent ordinance than ours, they have to follow our ordinance. And we even regulate golf courses. So really quickly, our campaign is kind of complicated. On the next slide, it shows that we do a whole lot. We have utility bill inserts that go out to residents. We provide frequently asked questions. We provide newsletter articles to anybody who will put it in their newsletters for the HOAs, our neighborhood services, our elected officials, anyone who wants to put out a newsletter and, spread the word about our ordinance. We are happy to help them do it. We even made some fun magnets that we put on all the county vehicles on June 1st, just so if somebody's at a traffic light and they see one of our inspectors out, in the field, they see a magnet that reminds them this is the summer period where, putting down fertilizer with nitrogen in it needs to be really done carefully. We put every single week, we've got a half-page advertisement in our Orlando Weekly. That's something new that we're trying this year. We do an annual postcard reminder to the commercial applicators and the institutional applicators to make sure that they update their training and follow our other requirements. We do have laminated signage, which is these posters that we put up at the retail establishments. And something new we just did this year is we've made a video that we can provide to any retail establishment who wants it. And it helps train the garden center staff so that they can help kind of tell the story, spread the message, answer the questions that somebody buying fertilizer might have. We do a lot of tabling at events. We work really closely with IFAS, and there's several reasons for that I'll touch on a few of those during my presentation. We do a lot of social media messaging. We've got our dedicated web pages with multimedia resources, like how do you calibrate a fertilizer spreader? How do you figure out how many square feet your yard is? How do you read a fertilizer label? We've got all of these little videos that we've made, and they're all on our web page. We do radio spots. If anybody asks us for an interview, we're like, sure, we would love to. So we do media interviews. We've paid for radio spots on multiple different platforms, country music, talk radio, you name it. We've if we can afford it, we'll buy it. And we've done some bus wraps, quite a few billboards, integrated our fertilizer awareness training for county employees, because if you're out in the field and somebody's wearing a county shirt, people don't know where they work. They might ask them a fertilizer question. So we're trying to, make an army of folks who can answer that. And of course, we have some cool giveaways. On our next slide, just real quickly, anybody who's applying fertilizer, similar to the Be Floridian campaign, we're trying to make sure that people do it responsibly. We've got stipulations for rainy weather. You don't want to be putting it down before or after rain. We don't want any kind of nutrients going into our storm drain system, so you need to clean up any spilled fertilizer and grass clippings. Make sure your spreader has a deflector device to keep it on the grass and not on the pavement. No phosphorus anytime during the year, and during the summer, no nitrogen in your fertilizer either. And the rest of the year, if you've got nitrogen in your fertilizer, 65% of it needs to be slow release type. To help residents figure out if they're hiring someone who actually understands our fertilizer ordinance, we've made it a requirement that if you're going to apply fertilizer in Orange County, you need to have proof that you've been properly trained and that you know how to put it down in accordance with our law. And we give you a decal to put on whatever vehicle you use to apply fertilizer. And that's pretty cool too, because we can just tell residents, make sure and look for that sticker. And if you want to ask them for their proof of training, you can do that too. So the next slide shows us where one of our commissioners had asked, they said, this ordinance is pretty complicated. Can you just maybe pick the top 3 things that you want people to do? So this is what we did in 2022 was we started out with a utility insert that just had 3 calls to action. Read the label, make sure, and this is for the fall one, make sure your nitrogen is only 65% of it, is at least 65% slow release. Check the weather, don't put it down when it's raining, and keep all your junk out of the storm drain. So that's how we started with that. And you can see we have it in 2 languages there, but we're branching out and putting it in other languages to boot. The next slide kind of shows how we're trying to connect our whole campaign to things that residents will hold dear, right? So anything you're doing in your yard, you're raking up leaves and they're going in the storm drain, it's going to damage your fun, when you go to the springs, because they're not going to be clean and healthy, so just trying to tie different items together. And we did use a marketing company for those graphics. We also used a marketing company to help us come up with the little graphics with the otter and the limpkin. So we were looking so this is funny with the otter and the limpkin because, limpkins are in our area. We see them on the Wekiva River a lot and in the Wekiva Basin and in other areas. And we see otters. People wanted manatees. And we were like, we don't really have manatees too much in the Orlando area. So we were sticking with the critters that were local. But if you go to the next slide, you can see we kind of caved and started putting some manatees on things because people really, really, oh my goodness, they respond so positively to manatees. And we, of course, love them anyway. So we're happy to have that scope creep there. But you can see on this slide, I've got the picture of the fertilizer car magnets that we put on our inspectors' vehicles every year. You can see we didn't do anything as fancy as Be Floridian. Our bus wraps were just on the tail ends. We probably don't have as much money as they have. And we put billboards around. So these are strategic to try and get people when they're out in their car and they're driving around and just things can pop up that they might see, randomly, as opposed to having to follow us on our social media pages, which is the next slide. And these are just a few that I've pulled together to kind of show, the first one is talking about 65% slow release nitrogen. So that would be the non-summer months, right? And then we also are trying to show pictures of, people enjoying being out in nature and the little cartoon otter and manatee, they get a lot of love. People like those. And then we try to also, use the turkey on the one on the right. That was just kind of a fun thing we're doing. We're trying to tie our fertilizer messaging in with the holidays. And it was kind of fun to use a turkey in one and remind people not to use phosphorus during the year. So the next slide shows we have a really cool opportunity working with Orlando Weekly, right? It's a weekly newspaper and they will publish whatever we want to put in there as half-page ads. We can change them as often as we like. We can change them every week if we want to. And they also put them out on their digital service. So that's been kind of a fun one, and trying to figure out if people are seeing them. That's a hard part, but it's another way to get to kind of a younger crowd and people that are mostly living in our urban areas really like Orlando Weekly. So in the next slide, this is some of our giveaways. We give away bags at tabling events, but the new one, the really fun one, is these socks. They're made out of bamboo and they're very soft, and you can see The little picture on the right shows we've got our URL that we put around the top band of the socks. So I tell people every time you do your laundry, it's going to remind you that we've got a fertilizer ordinance, and you've got to be thinking about how to keep our water quality clean. So, and the next slide is a really quick and dirty summary of what, just for the past year, right? We've done 19 outreach events. We've put 57 social media posts out on Facebook or X. We've estimated around 9,000 people have attended come to our table at tabling events and talked to us about fertilizer. Our website, we do track those visits. We've had over 10,000. We did put out 126,000 utility bill inserts. Our social media followers for Orange County is about 180,000. And for our Orlando Weekly, they say we get a roughly 200,000 monthly views between the digital edition and the advertising that they put on some of their partner websites. And this sounds crazy big, but between the radio stations and the billboard company, they gave us numbers of 17,712,000 impressions from our billboards and our radio ads. The next slide shows our measuring the effectiveness of our outreach. We have done some surveying throughout the years. Beginning in 2008, we did our initial survey, and you can see in that one, most of the people, the red column is, how many people were using fertilizer in 2008 to, down to the My Yard, My Springs one. It's definitely decreased significantly over the years. We've got, we were looking at, how many people were applying fertilizer during the restricted period, how many, what percent were reporting seeing campaign materials, and what percent are aware of our ordinance. And those were the same questions we asked with each of these surveys, and they were in different areas, but it kind of gives us an idea of what people are learning and, if we're being effective. So that takes me to my last slide, which talks about what we're planning to do in the future. We're currently working with a company who's developing a compliant fertilizer selection tool that's going to work on smartphones and on our website. So if somebody's at a big box store and they pull up a fertilizer, they can put it into the tool and it'll say not compliant for this time of year, or yes, it is compliant for fall, but not summer, or whatever. We're working on how it's gonna work, but we've got the money, we've got the contract, we've procured the service, and now it's just all in the works. We do want to do a fresh marketing campaign. We're looking to hire another company to develop something flashy and fresh and fun. And we'll do more surveying. We hope to do more radio slots, more billboards, and probably next year we're going to design another sock because the people really love our socks. They come to the table just for socks. Somebody sees a pair and then they all come over and want more. So, and that's pretty much it. All my contact information is on the next slide. If you have any questions, I'm happy to help.
Thanks so much, Jane. I need a pair of those socks.
I will get them in the mail to you.
Yeah, and I can't wait to see what you all are going to do to update your program. And I really love seeing all the data and results. Thanks. We'll bring you back for the Q&A. All right, our third presenter is Stacie Greco, Water Resource Program Manager for the Alachua County Environmental Protection Department. Alachua County has the distinction of having the longest blackout period in the state from July through February. And I saw Stacie give a presentation at the UF Water Institute earlier this year. That was one of the reasons I wanted to do this webinar, to highlight some of the great education going on around the state and some of the results. So thanks for being here, Stacie. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite and great presentations before mine. And you can go ahead to my first slide. So like my colleagues, Alachua County, we have a fertilizer ordinance. We only allow phosphorus if there is a deficiency. And as Ryan indicated, we only allow fertilizer with nitrogen in March, April, May, and June. So only 4 months out of 12. And it must be that 50% slow release nitrogen. This change was made at our April 9th, 2019 public hearing. It was the best, most interesting 5 hours of my life. It was a very heated debate, and I went through and summarized the findings about fertilizer during that presentation and in preparing for that. And if you'll go to the next slide, I'm going to mention this because I've heard people say that Alachua County ignored the science, and we absolutely did not. We did a pretty thorough literature review and were able to document fertilizer as a source of water quality pollution. The challenge is there is DEP funded research that really, IFAS, we all learned a lot. It was very valuable research in 2012. And if you read the comprehensive report from it, they recognize a lot of the caveats, a lot of the limitations of that research. But unfortunately, what has happened is as more and more people reference that work, we lose the caveats. And in that original work, it was field conditions maintained by turf scientists, which if you go outside and look at what your neighbors are doing, they're probably not turf scientists. Didn't include mixed species lawns that we see, below average rainfall, didn't simulate over irrigation. And there's a lot in the literature that the way that fertilizer moves in our landscape is when we over irrigate, and we know people over irrigate. And it only looked at nitrate. Nitrogen is in all different forms, and it only looked at leaching. So what's going down, not what's washing off. So I point this out not to try to discount that research at all. It was very valuable, but trying to encourage the university and IFAS to get messaging out to try to make sure that the industry understands these caveats. Because I will sometimes hear people say that a healthy lawn can just use all nitrogen that you put on it. But we know that is not the case. But with the next slide, I will move on talking about outreach, but I just wanted to get that out there. So before we made those changes to our code, and we did have a fertilizer code before we really lengthened that blackout period, I had applied for funding from the state to do an education campaign to really reduce fertilizer use and to calculate load reductions based on the campaign. As someone that's always competing for funding, I had just had an engineer started working for me and realized that, on his projects, he calculates and estimates the results. So let's do that with outreach. So it's pretty exciting. So next slide. I'm going to go through our campaign, and I'm going to frame it through what is social marketing, because social marketing is not social media, but social media is a tool of social marketing. But social marketing, it's research-based campaigns developed to change behavior. So it's not just printing a pamphlet with all the information and just expecting everyone to change their behavior. I wish, but that's not what it is. Next slide. So one of the first steps is to figure out who is your target audience. And this is really hard for us in the environmental field because we want everyone to listen to us all the time. But we do not have a budget that gets everyone to listen to us all the time. So we have to get away from that thought of the general public. So the top map here, this is Alachua County where I work. The brighter the color, more people said they fertilize. So if you look at that, you're going to see a lot of the county doesn't fertilize. So that means I need to not target them. So it really helped us geographically figure out where we needed to target. The second map is people that live in a homeowners association, people that have an HOA. And we know that they have different pressures. So that was our second demographic, was people that we know live in an HOA. We're going to have a little bit different messaging for them. Next slide. One of the second steps is to select a specific behavior. And this is also hard. It's very tempting to do something vague like, reduce your fertilizer use less water. but we have really high opinions of ourselves and we think we're doing the right thing. So when we hear a message like that, we don't think it applies to us. So we have to be really specific. And this is why it took me a long time to get into fertilizer, because I just didn't know what behavior to market. So what we did was, for our fertilizer users, skip the fertilizer this year. Get people to start for a year, and then we're continuing to run the campaign. And if people see that, their life doesn't fall apart if they don't fertilize, then maybe they'll continue to do it. And then for our HOA, we had don't use fertilizer in the backyard, because we recognized they had different pressures for the front yard. Let them try it out in the backyard. And this is that image there. That is our yard mullet idea. So it was business up front, party in the back. That idea, we market tested it. It bombed. Whenever I talk in forums like this, people love it, but our target audience hates it. So you'll probably never get to see me use the yard mullet, except for in arenas like this. Next slide. So you also have to identify, what are the barriers? Why aren't people doing it already? What are the benefits? What will they get if they do it? So in our pre-survey, we learned that people would reduce their fertilizer use if they understood it harmed the environment in the springs. If they knew it was illegal or banned, that was not a high motivator. So we have that in a lot of our campaign, but it's not, we don't lead with it, with the ban, because that wasn't a high motivator. And we found that knowledge was a barrier, and that's not always the case with behaviors, but people did not see that connect between what they were doing in their yard and what we're seeing at our spring. So we really tied that in to all of our materials. Next slide. Different tools you can use for influencing behavior. Norms is a big one. We like to be like our peers. So if you can position your desired behavior as the norm, then that's really great. So when we did the original survey, we found that 55% weren't fertilizing already. So we were able to use that in our campaigns, that, hey, you're not alone with this, and use that to kind of start to make that the norm. Next slide. And these are images from our social media. We do a lot of paid social media. One of our incentives was, healthier springs, healthier groundwater. Your yard can still look great. We didn't want to have just images of slime and doom. And so we had a lot of nice pictures of people enjoying springs, especially our youth. Next slide. Lots of communication channels. We did use print media, a utility mailer. We partnered with GRU up here, billboards, website. We have 2 beautiful vehicle wraps, press releases. And I need to update this number because we just spent a little more money, but we've spent about $84,000 on direct marketing for the campaign. So that's not in graphic design and such. And it's been seen over 19 million times. So that's a lot of times the same person seeing it over and over, but we know we have to really see messages a lot before we act on it. And this billboard is just a picture of one of them that we've done. Next slide. So this was a fun message. So since the yard mullet bombed, when we did our market testing, people liked backyards are for berries and belly laughs, not fertilizer. So showing people enjoying their yard and not having to worry about fertilizer. So this is an example of then we would target this social media ad in our areas where we know we have a lot of people that live in homeowners associations. So that's kind of how we get that targeted message out. Next slide. This is part of trying to get people to understand that connection between fertilizer and algae. So really showing what starts here can end up here. Next. So you always want to evaluate what you're doing to make changes and just see if you're hitting your target. We had a lot of people do our survey in Alachua County. We can have a 95% confidence interval if we have 400 survey completes. We had over 1,100 on our pre-test and almost 2,300 on our post-test. So we felt really good about the results. Next. So we originally, in the pre-survey, 55% said they didn't fertilize. That went up to 65% within the first year. And that was all the way to 73% if they reported that they saw the campaign elements. Well, this has now jumped up to 68% of people say they don't fertilize, which is a really good problem for me to have. Do I continue to give away those materials, or do I mock them up like I did here? And I will take that problem any day of the week. Next slide. So then we wanted to see, okay, what does this all mean? So we hired an engineering firm. They were Wood Environment at the time, WSP now, and they loaded it all into a really fancy spreadsheet that I love. We looked at spatial data. We used a lot of the same tools like Ryan mentioned at the beginning, the NSILT, like what DEP uses for the BMAPs. We use that tool. We put everything in, and we were conservative because I did not want to overestimate our impact, right? Because I really want to see changes in our spring. So we made some conservative assumptions also, and calculated a 20% reduction in loading. So 8,000 pounds not making it to surface water, 12,000 pounds not making it to groundwater because of people changing their behaviors in their yard. Next slide. So then if you calculate that based on like what did we spend on it, the per pound, it's $1.35 or $8 per pound. And engineering projects, and I like engineers, but they're expensive. So once the pollution gets there, to remove it, it's very expensive. And there you're looking at $200 to $1,000 per pound to remove it. So it really, to me, shows the cost benefit analysis of outreach. Next slide. And these were just some of our funding partners, because we've been working on this behavior for a long time. And I do want to mention you'll see the logo next to the county, Uppercase Inc. That's the consulting firm that has really created all of these materials and has really put a lot of hours into this campaign, and they continue to tweak it and make it better. We just did a recent refresh because Facebook thought our stuff was getting stale. So with that, I think you might be opening it up for questions for everyone.
Not quite, Stacie, but we will be there soon. But thank you very much. I really love all the ways that you all are able to quantify the work, especially looking at the cost to remove a pound of nitrogen, was something the Springs Council has been focused on for years and years and years, and just seeing the benefits of education campaigns when infrastructure costs are so high and the benefits we can make. So thank you very much for that presentation. And our final presenter is our very own Brenda Wells, FSC Communications Director. Last year, the Springs Council received a grant from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Foundation to build a social media campaign to raise awareness about urban fertilizer use and local ordinances. Brenda and Chloe collaborated with photographers, videographers, and artists within our little Springs world here to create the campaign. And I'm excited to have Brenda talk to you about it today. Take it away, Brenda.
All righty. Thank you, Ryan. And thanks everyone who's presented. I'm a huge fan of all three of your campaigns. I remember the Be Floridian campaign from way back, and it made an impact. So our project was not quite as wide-reaching as, a governmental project. We wanted to do a social media campaign only, so it's not out there on buses and billboards, and to use social media to change attitudes about two behaviors. We talk about all of the different sources of pollution to the springs: agriculture, septic tanks, fertilizers, and people want to know, yeah, but what can I do right now? And so there are two things that we came up with. It was very easy that they could do to impact the springs right now. And there they are. Step 1, don't buy spring water. We won't talk about that one today. Step 2, don't fertilize. That's the one we'll talk about. We didn't have, a large budget. We did have some funding from Fish and Wildlife Foundation, but we wanted to play to our strengths, and that was a large combined social media presence. And not only is it a large presence, I feel like we have a particularly engaged audience. We get a lot of feedback, which is nice when you're rolling out some ideas. we didn't have to wonder what people thought about them. We got a lot of feedback and a lot of comments. So that was a nice way to get some idea of how some of these, concepts and messages were landing. And also, I think it was a strength that we have the freedom to experiment a little and maybe be a little edgy. If you know Florida Springs Council, you know that we're not bashful, and we could kind of get out there and do something a little unusual. And I want to also just acknowledge the fact that the Center for Public Interest Communication at the University of Florida was a really big impact on us. It's an impact on me, but Chloe just recently graduated with her master's degree with a concentration from the Center for Public Interest Communication. And what they do is basically what you've been listening to for the past hour or so, how to change behaviors, not to sell something, but to make positive change in the world. And yes, I'm a big fan of Alachua County's. I'm one of the 68%. You heard Stacie talk about what social marketing is, and you also heard her speak a little bit on social norms, which is to, present a message that makes a behavior sort of the preferred normal behavior. So you don't feel like you're standing on the outside, you are joining the norm. And ways that we wanted to use that messaging, it seems like it hits better if you're using humor, or if you have really good images that are stunning or make someone stop and look, or it evokes some feelings like nostalgia, or it's really easy to kind of tap into the pride that people have around springs. We're all proud of the springs. So this was one of our highest performing images, not necessarily on Facebook, but on Instagram. I believe of all the things that we put out, it might have been either it reached the most people or close to it. And Water Bear Photography helped us with this one. But real Floridians don't fertilize, and that's a phrase that we kept using throughout as we shared throughout the campaign. And forgive me, I'm trying to go a little fast so that we don't run over too much. It did a little better on Instagram than Facebook. For a while, I thought maybe that's because the Facebook audience was a little older. Instagram audience was younger and kind of liked the image. But I realized when I really dug into it that our audiences are almost identical on the two platforms. So it's likely just that's the way Instagram is. It's more image heavy. That's what's going to get the attention. The thing that really stuck out about this particular message was that it reached the most of non-followers. Working within our own social media accounts, we knew that we would mostly be speaking to people who kind of already know what fertilizer does, and they probably already don't fertilize. So by creating something that people wanted to share, we were really hoping that we could get it out past the people who already follow us. And that's exactly what happened. They shared it in mostly community groups, but also to their own pages. On Facebook, this one was a favorite. And Chloe, you can play this one. I might have to play it again. So with that one, we were trying to evoke those feelings that I was speaking of about nostalgia, remembering what it was like as a kid and wanting to have that for your kids. And something about it must have struck a chord with people, because this was one that also did really, really well. This was actually pre-campaign, but it was a reminder of how not everything has to be slick and produced. It was just a really silly poem that we put together. And I think the fact that, it's bookended by we wrote a poem and the end gave it a little humor. Something about that had people, sharing it and thinking it was worth getting out there. It was one of our largest shares on this messaging, which is funny to me because it is one of the ones that was not, well thought out and produced. And while that one was a surprise hit, we kind of knew that this one was going to hit. I mentioned earlier that if you know the Florida Springs Council, you know that we're not shy to get a little edgy. And this is an example of that. And it goes by quickly. I'm not sure if you caught that, but your happy little manatee flag as the fertilizer goes by, he ends up as our well-known angry manatee. And of course, it's an element of humor. It's a little shocking. And that caused people to want to share it and get it out there. More nostalgia. This one did fairly well. Do it one more time. If you look at the first, they're on beautiful springs. And I think that perhaps the fact that some people had to watch it over and over again to see the change that was happening might have helped, with the social media algorithms. This one, we weren't sure how this was going to go, but people participate, just like the poem. I think that the poem did so well because people wrote their own and participated and commented on it. This was another participatory post. So we're learning that those that get a lot of, people wanting to join in and show their creativity work well. We provided an empty sign and a scene, and people, made their own signs and submitted them. And that was pretty popular. And one last part of our campaign, there were a lot of other messages in the campaign. That was sort of our highlights. We wanted to not just talk about don't fertilize, but we wanted to make sure that people were aware of ordinances. We had gotten comments from people that, since it was our followers, they were well aware of the ordinances, but they wanted other people to be more aware of the ordinances. And our counties are doing a great job in making sure that's happening. But we came up with the Neighborhood Slime Watch. It's based on Neighborhood Crime Watch that gave it sort of it's cute and funny, but it also has a little reminder that it is law as well. It's not just, something that we're asking you to do. And part of Slime Stoppers allowed people to go to a landing page on our website. You can learn each of the county's codes, all of you from, Orange County, Alachua County, Pinellas County. It leads to your information. So someone it's sort of a clearinghouse for all the counties who have an ordinance for people to go find that information. And they're able to print flyers if they want that physical item in their community clubhouse, at their school, wherever they feel like that could do some good. And finally, the takeaways that we had after this campaign was over was that a lot of these posts were seen by a substantial number of people outside of our followers. And that's something that we were really aiming for, because we knew that our followers were probably already aware. What we wanted to do was create things that caused them to want to share that message further. Another thing that I learned is that those neighborhood and discussion groups are a valuable way to reach people. They're very active, and that's where a lot of this got shared. And I have now embraced those neighborhood and discussion groups as a place to go whenever we have some grassroots actions that we would like people to take in a particular area, it's a great way to reach people who are ready to listen. And our next step, we would like to take some of the most successful messages, the ones that seem to resonate, outside of the digital space and see what we can do in the real world. And then finally, I hope that this is evidence that even without the big budget and the wide-ranging, bigger campaigns, nonprofits, clubs, neighborhood groups, you can amplify the messages that are already out there, or you can even create your own. And, say a high school environmental club could create a campaign that targeted the parents of that school. So all of these campaigns heard over and over and over might actually, keep moving us past that 55%, 68%, until we reach an even higher number of people not fertilizing. Okay, I think we're ready for questions, Ryan.
Thank you so much, Brenda. All right, we'll bring everybody back in. Again, thank you all for watching today. I know we're running a little long, but we do have some questions that we want to get to. And thank you so much to our guests, Jane and Blake and Stacie for being here. So one of the questions, and Jane, Blake, or Stacie, feel free to jump in. But, how do you target homeowner associations or communicate with homeowners associations? Since I think, for a lot of folks, the HOA is kind of maybe at least a perceived obstacle to changing yard types or reducing fertilization.
Okay. I can start. I know we work with our neighborhood services division because they maintain a contact list of all of the HOAs in our county, and they've got newsletters that go out to them. We offer to come and speak to their groups. We provide all kinds of just information for them. We engage with them every chance we get. We also do some HOA board member trainings, through our county, and we can go and speak to them there. We speak at our community conference, which is highly attended by HOA managers. So we have lots of different ways we can do it. Those are just a few that I can think of off the top of my head.
Something that we did in Alachua County is we actually adopted a Florida-friendly landscaping code for HOAs that basically, if homeowners want to make Florida-friendly changes to their landscape, the HOA cannot prevent them. And it's been a really valuable code. We've gotten a lot of change with just education. We actually just did have our first court case and we won. And the ruling was it's not Florida friendly to make someone cut down a tree so that there's more sunlight for grass. So it'll be really interesting to see how that plays into this as the word gets out about that case.
Thanks.
That's great, Stacie. Blake, you have anything you'd like to add?
I think, yeah, we haven't done, as I mentioned, Be Floridian was really focused on homeowners and residents and changing those norms. But, a big barrier, especially as time has gone on and, more HOAs are emerging, more retirement communities are emerging, we're finding that a lot of folks, no longer think that it's up to them. They have, whether it's an HOA saying what they can or can't do, or a lawn company that they outsource, the job to. And so HOAs, as well as those landscape companies, are going to probably be one of our two target audiences for this revamp for Be Floridian because of, this kind of outsized impact and influence that they have on fertilizer use.
Excellent. We had another question, and the questions about dooryard citrus trees were expanded a little bit. These blackout periods and ordinances, do they only apply to, lawns and grass, or do they also apply to citrus and gardens and things like that?
In Alachua, ours applies to everything except like your fruit trees and your vegetable gardens, but your landscape plants, it does apply in Alachua.
Orange County is the same.
So your citrus trees should be okay to take care of, but not, if it's in your lawn, if it's just for lawn decorative, not so much. All right, and Margaret Tolbert asks about fertilizer sales bans. That it's confusing that we have these long blackout periods, but you can still walk into your local, Ace or Home Depot, Lowe's, and buy nitrogen fertilizer. Does anyone have any thoughts on that, and if that's something we might see changing in the future now that new ordinances are possible?
I mean, that preemption came about after Pinellas County, they were able to ban that sales. And I think they've seen great improvements in the Bay, and you might be able to speak to that. I think it goes down to the importance of voting and being vocal about things that we want to see, because it is hard when as local governments, we're responsible for cleaning up our water, but then sometimes our hands are tied and there's tools we don't have, because it really does make it harder for the industry, because homeowners can just go in and buy the products, whereas an industry, their license is on the line. They don't want to get caught violating.
So one of the things we're doing a couple of interesting things. Like, first, we have a household hazardous waste collection facility, and I've actually reached out to them to ask them to keep track of how much fertilizer is taken there, because we've had discussions with Scott's and Sunnyland about the size of the bags that people purchase, and lot sizes are smaller than maybe they were historically, and you don't have to use as much fertilizer, and it is very humid in Florida, so bagged fertilizer sometimes gets all clumped up and ruined if you don't use it right away. And there's people who will just put it in their garbage, of course, when they clean it out. But then there's other folks who have a conscience about it, and they take it to the HHWs. So we've started collecting that data, and I would like to put the call out to other counties, see what your HHWs are collecting, because it's probably a drop in the bucket according, like in comparison to what's going in the landfill. But it's an interesting thing to consider. The other thing we're doing, like I said, we're we made a cool little video to help the lawn, the lawn and garden centers be able to talk to the residents about our ordinance, because we do think it's a bit complicated. And we do think that reading a fertilizer label can be kind of intimidating. So anyway, we're doing our best. We can't tell them what they can sell, of course, but residents don't want to buy the wrong thing. So we're trying to help kind of get everybody meeting in the middle where we can.
Well, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to individual choices, because even, we have, Pinellas County is an example of where you actually do have prohibited sales of fertilizer during the ordinance, but at the same time, sort of recognizing that there isn't a way to sort of police people really in reality in front of their own homes that are applying fertilizer. And so, while you can, ban the sale of fertilizer, it's still difficult to be able to prevent someone from, purchasing a bag while it's available to be sold, and then just fertilizing, taking what's in their garage already and going ahead and fertilizing during the period where there's a ban anyway. So I think, that's a tool, a potential tool to help reduce, some of those driving forces behind fertilizer use. But ultimately, it comes down to individual behaviors and people choosing not to apply fertilizer during these, precarious periods.
Right. We want to make it difficult, but we know people can always go and get fertilizer if they want it. So it's not the end all be all. What about signage? Is that something any of the counties have, signage in the retail locations alerting people?
They do. Yeah. So where we have in a lot of the stores here in Pinellas County, so whenever the bans go into effect, they have signs. They used to have them a lot more sort of once the ordinance was new, but it's kind of, more, especially in Pinellas County, people are most aware of the fertilizer ordinances. So it is creating, at least a general public knowledge, but also even, they'll put up those little sort of road signs, that you see when you usually say like road is going to be closing on a certain date. They'll put up things like those on the side of the road, just reminding, no fertilizer and things like that. So there are some signage and things like that the counties can put up.
We made it part of our ordinance to the retail establishments have to put a sign. They have to put a poster up, but we provide the posters and we reach out at the beginning of every year and just kind of make sure that they still have their signs. We do spot checks. That's what interns are great for, things like that. So.
Great. There's a question about how did they ban blackouts? They being the legislature and blackouts being blackout fertilizer periods. In last year's budget, the legislature snuck in a provision at the last minute that prevented any local governments from adopting or revising fertilizer ordinance that included blackout periods. While IFAS did a study on the effectiveness of existing urban fertilizer ordinances. That study was completed, and I thought one of the real interesting takeaways was that there was a strong correlation between the strength of the local ordinance and the awareness of local residents about the importance of reducing fertilizer use. So it kind of really ties into that. Strong ordinances, even without heavy-handed enforcement, seem to lead to more education and better results. And I think we're hearing about some of those education campaigns tied to strong ordinances today. Which is great. All right, we'll do one more question. Kristen Rubin wants to know if anything specifically is being done to reach out to realtors and developers. I guess from the developer perspective, is anyone thinking about ways to get away from our traditional St. Augustine grass lawns into requiring or encouraging Florida-friendly landscaping and new development?
Yeah, in Alachua County, we kind of get at it through the irrigation piece. We kind of lump these together because typically if you're fertilizing, you're irrigating. So with our irrigation design code, we just strengthen that only 50% of the landscape can be irrigated. So it's really pushing people into more natives and less manicured landscape. So hopefully that translates to fertilizer use also.
Excellent. All right. Well, I want to thank all of our guests today for being here. Jane Gregory, Blake Simmons, Stacie, Greco, and of course, Brenda. I found this all very fascinating. I hope everyone really enjoyed it. Thank you all for watching. I encourage everyone to visit FloridaSpringsCouncil.org. You can sign up for our free informed membership to find out about alerts like this, our legislative stuff. Go send an email or make a phone call to the governor about those veto alerts. And a lot of great information here today. I love that people provided their contact info. So if you're in those counties, feel free to reach out. I know all these folks would love help spreading the word about the importance of reducing urban fertilizer pollution. Thank you, everyone, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.